This morning, the March primary is upon us. Early voting begins tomorrow. What will turnout look like? Texas Democrats at a crossroads. This summer, they elect a state party chairman. Gilberto Hinojosa running for re-election, defending his decade in office with us. While Carol Robinson and Kim Olsen this morning are calling for a course correction. Texas progressives taking a page from the Tea Party. Why are they trying to defeat two veteran Democrats in the state legislature? And some of the biggest names in the March primary are in hiding right now, avoiding interviews and tough questions. Is this a strategy that's going to work?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good Sunday morning to our viewers across the state. More than half of the vote in the March primary will likely be cast over the next 14 days. Before we get to our coverage, though, let's start you out with the top political headlines here in Texas. We are less than 24 hours away from early voting beginning in the March primary. Polls open tomorrow at 7 a.m. You can cast a ballot in person over the next 2 weeks. If you still, though, want to vote by mail, you have until this Friday, February 18th, to apply for a mail-in ballot. It has to be turned in, though, by Election Day. The number of abortions in Texas has dropped significantly since Senate Bill 8 became law. Remember, this is the one that bans abortions after a fetal heartbeat is detected, usually about 6 weeks through the pregnancy. The state said that abortions dropped by more than 60%, almost 60% rather, last fall. Pro-choice supporters are still fighting, though, the state's abortion restrictions in court. And the Houston mayor's race is coming together. Chris Hollins announced he is running to replace Sylvester Turner. Turner term limited out. Hollins is the former Harris County clerk who came up with drive-through voting in 2020. The other big candidate in the race right now, at least, is State Senator John Whitmire there. And we're told that more people are also considering jumping in. This morning, though, we are digging into the future of the Texas Democratic Party. At their state convention in Dallas this summer, Democrats will decide who should lead the party. A party that has struggled with organization, with messaging, and has not elected anyone to a statewide office in 28 years, since 1994. Three candidates want the top job here: Carol Robinson, Colonel Kim Olsen, and the incumbent Gilberto Hinojosa. Since his name comes first alphabetically, we begin with him. Mr. Chairman, let's start with a simple question here. You've been in office for 10 years as a state Democratic Party chairman. The Democrats have not won a single statewide office over the last decade. Why should Democrats reelect you?
Well, I think it's clear that turning Texas blue is not an event, it's a process. When I took over, it was right after the 2010 elections where the party had been decimated. We had 47 members in the Texas legislature. The Republicans could meet without a single Democrat and have a quorum. There couldn't be a walkout at that time. Today, we've elected in the last two election cycles 67 members to the Texas legislature, to the House. That's a 42% increase. If you look at the overall Democratic gains statewide, when I took over, 30% of the people of the state of Texas lived in Democratically controlled counties. Today, 70% of the people live in Democratically controlled counties. We flipped Harris County that didn't have a single Democrat countywide elected official. Today, there's not a single Republican countywide elected official. They will have a supermajority in the commissioner's court there. Yeah. Fort Bend County, the same thing. Same thing in San Antonio, Bexar County. In Tarrant County, we won 2 election cycles in a row countywide there. We flipped half the courts of appeals in the state of Texas. We only had 2 democratically controlled courts of appeals. Now half of them are. We have increased our turnout by 5% every single election cycle. We are the second largest increase of any state in the country. In fact, in 2020, we increased by 30% our turnout. We went from when I took over a 24-point margin with Barack Obama in the presidential election to 5 points in November. Right. The party is now raising 10 times more money election cycle today than they did when I took over. Well, we have not been able to get that magic number with the statewide election, but we have made significant gains to where today we are in 2020 we were at where Georgia was at in 2016. So,
Mr. Chairman, what does it take to get that magic number, to get a Democrat elected statewide?
Well, I mean, I think that we came really close in 2018 with Beto. He came within 225,000 votes. We came really close with Joe Biden. You know, he came within a 5-point margin, better than any state that had the Biden administration money had put significant money into that didn't win. I mean, like Ohio, for example. You know, we need to have a major national investment in Texas, but they've increased it, but not to the point where they've increased it in other states.
That's the thing that we're seeing here. I know you're living it, though, is that the national Democrats still don't think Texas is in play. You're saying that we're making, or the Democrats are making significant strides here. At what point does the national party see what you're doing?
The national party has to make a decision that they're going to invest in Texas for us to be able to win. I mean, we were polling on every state house race and even in the presidential race in 2020 ahead of the Republican Party. What they did when they found out about this polling, they doubled the amount of money that we're going to spend in Texas, the Republican Party did. To the $200 million that were spent statewide, they spent $400 million. It's really hard to beat that when you're looking at a state like Texas that in the past has not been able to raise that kind of money, but we did outstanding, I think, considering. We're one of the few states that didn't lose House seats in 2020.
Mr. Chairman, we are out of time, but we appreciate you joining us, and best of luck to you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
There are two Democratic state lawmakers who now face fights from inside their own party. It's a group called Texans for Better Democrats Coalition, and it's trying to unseat State Rep Harold Dutton there from Houston, and also State Rep Art Fierro from El Paso. So who is this coalition? Well, it turns out it's the Texas Organizing Project, Communication Workers of America, and the Working Families Party. Patrick Svitek from the Texas Tribune reported this out the other day. He joins us from Austin to dig a little deeper into this. Patrick, good morning to you. And let's start out with a basic question. Why don't progressives like Harold Dutton and Art Fierro?
Yeah, there are kind of unique reasons, I think, for both of these incumbents why Democrats may not like them. Harold Dutton is a longer-serving Houston Democrat who's been a bit of an independent inside his party when it comes to some issues, particularly education. He supports expanding charter schools, for example, which is not a view that is universally embraced by Democrats. And then last legislative year, he upset some inside his party when he was the chairman of the House Public Education Committee and helped revive legislation putting restrictions on transgender student athletes. And so that clearly, caused a number of folks inside his party to be pretty outraged with him. Then you look at someone like Art Fierro in El Paso. He's a newer member, not as long serving as Harold Dutton, but in the eyes of this group and other Democrats who've been critical of him, he really misstepped by being among the first House Democrats to return from that quorum break last year over the Republican elections bill. And to them, that is, I think, the main case against him in this election.
Wow. Yeah, something to watch in both of those two different sides of the state. Patrick, back to you in just a moment. Thank you very much. Coming up, the two Texas Democrats who say their party needs a course correction. Colonel Kim Olsen there and Carol Robinson defend their own records and lay out a vision for what they think their party needs to do next. Plus, less than 24 hours away from early voting, we're watching turnout over the next 2 weeks. Will the past predict their future? Welcome back to Inside Texas Politics. Our next guest says the Texas Democratic Party needs a course correction. Texas Democrats have not scored any wins statewide as they have hoped. The blue wave has yet to materialize, and Colonel Kim Olsen, a U.S. Air Force veteran, says she can fix it simply because she has run for office before. Colonel Olsen, welcome to the program. Let's start out with something you say that you're going to do, and that is you will finally lead the Texas Democrats to win a statewide office, something they haven't done since 1994. My question is one that others have too, though. You couldn't get yourself elected to one of those statewide offices when you ran for Texas Agriculture Commissioner. How do you intend to help anyone else?
That's a great question, Jason, and thank you for having me on board today. I think by running statewide and visiting 244 counties across our great state, what you learned as a statewide candidate is A, how to run on a statewide platform, and B, some of the basically voids that we have within the infrastructure of our respective parties that sit out there. It's my belief that if you really want to win at the statewide, you have to have strong, foundations for these candidates that run statewide to stand on and build their campaigns. And that comes at the local level, whether you're running for school boards, whether you're running statewide or House seats, you must have strong county parties in order to get the votes out.
One of the biggest problems that Democrats face, as you well know, is messaging. And you said that you would really go after and counter Republican rhetoric. Can you give us some examples of how you might counter that?
That is an excellent question. This is one of the things I hear as I visit with almost every single county chair across the state and get their feedback about what they need, especially in our rural areas. And that sometimes our messaging doesn't resonate with just regular folks. Look, people care about having reasonable education for their children. They care about healthcare, especially on the post end of this pandemic. And number three, they want economic opportunities all across the spectrum. And examples of us is sometimes we're just constantly on the defense instead of talking about all the great things that Democrats bring to bear, like the infrastructure bill, which would bring broadband to places in Texas that we haven't had, which would bring means of moving to clean energy so that jobs aren't threatened across our great state, the number one energy state in the union. I mean, this is the kinds of things we as Democrats have to advertise and make people feel safe and good about voting for Democratic leaders.
Well, let's talk about rural counties for a moment. You're joining us from Palo Pinto County, which is to the
I am.
west of Fort Worth in North Texas. Republicans dominate
They
rural
do.
Texas. So how do you convince rural Republican voters to walk away from the GOP and support Democrats?
Rural Texas used to be a Democratic stronghold. And the reason was because Democrats are about the working family, the farmers, those in the field, those that, aren't represented by big corporations. And I think we have to go back to those basics. Again, I'm going to repeat myself here. Folks in rural Texas, the number one employer tends to be school systems. So if you privatize that stuff, that means we lose our jobs. Number two, 26 hospitals have closed across rural Texas. Why? Because we didn't want to expand Medicaid and Medicare. That means people drive for hours to get to a hospital. And that's why rural counties die, is because young families won't move there unless they have access to good education, healthcare, and decent jobs. And the last thing is, look, rural Texas comprises 20% of the voting bloc, and we've been ignored for too long. And that's where we have to start. Jason, we don't have to win every rural Texas. We've just got to cut down the margins and show those that live in rural Texas that we are reasonable leaders that want to do right by their respective families.
Colonel Olsen, we appreciate it. We were out of time, but thank you so much and good luck to you.
Thank you, Jason. And you can see more about me at kimolsentx.com. You all stay well and be safe.
At their state convention this summer, Texas Democrats will also consider one more person to lead their party, Carroll Robinson. Right now, he chairs the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats, and he has also served on the Houston City Council. Mr. Robinson, good morning and welcome to the program here. Let's start out with two basic questions. Why are you challenging the incumbent who's been there for a decade? And secondly, how do you think you can turn around the state Democratic Party?
So I want to be clear. I'm not running against anybody. I've been elected to public office, and my basic rule is run when you believe you have a better solution. And I have a better solution. I describe it as rebuilding the party from the bottom up. I think we've got to have precinct chairs in every one of the 9,000 precincts, a county party chair, and we've got to give them specific instructions on what we need them to do to turn out a specific number of Democratic voters in each of those precincts to win the state.
Republicans, as you know, are investing in the Rio Grande Valley. Democrats seem to have written off the rural parts of the state. If you're elected state party chair, where in the world do you start? Because there's a lot to do, it seems like.
Well, you have to start in rural Texas and with Hispanic voters across the state, from South Texas to the big urban areas in the East Texas and West Texas. So I've been in Texas Democratic Party politics for years. And I remember we used to win East Texas and was competitive. If you look at Ann Richards' victory speech, she talks about we won the Valley, won East Texas, and won counties in West Texas. So we've got to go back to basics as Democrats.
How did things get astray? What happened to lose West Texas, East Texas, and now it looks like the Rio Grande Valley is threatened?
Sometimes people take voters for granted. And in this business, as Bill Clinton pointed out, it's not what you've done, it's what you're going to do. And you have to remind the voters, I see you, I hear you, I respect you, and I want you.
Mr. Robinson, as you know, one of the biggest problems for Democrats is messaging. It's not just a state problem, it's a national problem. But how in the world do you attack that and help Democrats settle on something simple as a message?
Well, you've got to bring some experts together, and those experts include Democrats and their consultants who are winning at the local level, because we're electing city council members, commissioners. So we'll come together as partners, but I want to make sure that Democrats are anchored in opportunity, prosperity, and progress. You know, we have to restore and advance progress in Texas as Democrats.
And for people who don't know, you are credited with rebuilding the Texas Coalition of Black Democrats. But as you know, the Democratic Party in Texas is very diverse. What do you tell Democratic voters in this state on how you'd be inclusive to everyone?
Well, I was elected at large in Houston, and for the viewers, Houston is a multiracial, pretty damn large city, and you have to run across multiple constituencies, including reaching out to business Republicans, to women, to African-American, Hispanics, the Asian community. So I know how to build a multiracial, multi-generational, multi-regional coalition. I've been in the Democratic Party, and I worked on the campaign that helped elect Ann Richards. So I have the vision, the experience, and I believe the insight of how you build a winning Democratic coalition across the entire state of Texas.
For years, we've heard about a blue wave that's going to wash across Texas. The presidential races have gotten tighter in this state, but nothing like a blue wave has ever materialized. Why not?
Well, you got to stop looking for a wave. You know, you have to make your own cannonball splash. But more importantly, you just have to have this understanding. All we need as Democrats is to believe we can win, and we just need one more vote. You win elections by having just one more vote than your opponent. Yeah. And so that's the mindset and mentality I'm going to drive into the party. We just have to win now, and all that takes is one more vote.
Mr. Robinson, we appreciate it. Good luck to you.
Thank you very much, and have a great day.
Coming up, why are some of the leading candidates in the March primary in hiding, avoiding interviews and tough questions? We will start there next on the Roundtable. Time now for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Patrick Svitek is back from the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy is here every week from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. And Bernadine Steptoe is a political producer at WFAA in Dallas and joins us for this segment. Patrick, let's start with you. And early voting begins tomorrow. What do we expect turnout is going to look like, especially considering the last midterm, 2018, had some pretty decent turnout?
It did. In the 2020 primary, I think the turnout rate in Texas was about a quarter of registered voters. Obviously, there was a competitive Democratic presidential primary on the ballot 2 years ago. We don't have that this time. But I wouldn't discount the potential for high turnout, relatively high turnout this time, because you do have a lot of competitive Democratic and Republican primaries down ballot, partly a result of redistricting, which caused members to retire, creating a bunch of open seats and crowded fields for those primaries. And so, I would be on alert for maybe some expectations beating turnout just for that reason alone. There are a lot of competitive primaries down ballot.
Bud, what are you expecting?
Oh, that's just like saying the tortoise is going to run just a little bit faster this cycle. Usually 90% of Texans don't vote. This time, I guess maybe 88% of Texans won't vote. There's no Senate race. There's not really a governor's race. There are some local races, but generally it's just some overlap and some Republicans who are kind of pepped up against Joe Biden that'll come out and vote in this primary.
Bernadine, the Republican side does have some competitive races there, especially Attorney General.
Yes, and Democrats do as well. There are a lot of competitive races down ballot, as Patrick mentioned. So I think that you're not going to have presidential level turnout, but you will have a decent turnout because there are competitive races, Patrick, especially local.
Speaking of races, Patrick, we've noticed that a number of leading candidates have been avoiding TV appearances, have been avoiding editorial board appearances, and really been kind of keeping quiet. Is this the right strategy as we really close in on voting starting?
Well, is it the good question is is it the right strategy for democracy and for the voters, or is it the right strategy for the
Yeah.
candidate? If you're the candidate and you feel like you're ahead and you have a good chance of winning, you don't want to expose yourself to any opportunity to elevate your opponent or opponents, or where you could make a mistake of your own. And so it's probably in your best interest not to pursue those opportunities like a debate. Whether it's good for democracy and voters is a totally separate question. And the answer there is no, it's not good. Usually in terms of the question of whether it's good for democracy and the voters, usually you want to provide as much opportunity as possible for these candidates to take their case to the voters and answer questions.
Bud splitting hairs there, but he's right. The campaigns have, one thing in mind, and that's winning and looking at the numbers.
And originally, some of the candidates said that we don't want the endorsements of the liberal media. But some of those candidates have come back to us now that there's a paper shortage. They can't get their mailers out. There's so many mailers that they've run out of paper to print them on. And so they're looking for another way to get their face and name out.
Bernadine, I guess at the end of the day, this really shouldn't surprise anyone who follows politics.
Absolutely not, because the game is to win. And now you have candidates who can afford it are taking their messages directly to the voters. And they're using social media. They're using other avenues other than the traditional form of advertising. So can you blame them? Especially if they have the money and they don't need traditional advertising, going to newspapers and doing interviews. Yeah. So they're aiming to win.
And we shall see with early voting beginning tomorrow. Guys, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Thank you for watching as well. We're back again next Sunday to take you inside Texas politics and hope you can join us then. Until then, take care.